I am here to report for the State Association in North Carolina, and it's I would say, a comedy of tragedy and triumph this last year and a half. We have had a lot of mishaps, a lot of misfortunes, and a lot of triumphs, and I'd like to talk to you a little about those. I start with the tragedies because I think, like Bob Smith, these are things that happen to us at our age, and we need to be accommodating to them, and it's one of the things we had to do in North Carolina this last year. In our election last year, I was still the treasurer at that time. Willie Johnson was elected as president, and at the election, just before the election, the nominee for vice president had to drop out because of illness. And our past president, Clint Willis, agreed to become our vice president. Well, that was in October of 2012. In November, there was an election in North Carolina. And I'll say more about this in a little while, but I'll tell you that in this election in 2012, the Republicans swept everything. They took the governorship, and they took both houses of the legislature. And so that was quite a shock to everybody in North Carolina. It was the first time in over 100 years that the Republicans had held all of those offices. And the shock in North Carolina was breathless, you might say. The first thing, of course, they did was to redistrict, and you can imagine the gerrymandering that went on with that. Fortunately, that didn't affect us very much, but it was quite a thing. Shortly after that election, Willie Johnson had an accident in which her foot was badly damaged. The doctors put her in a cast and said, "You will not travel for at least 6 months." And she had to resign. Clint Willis, as vice president, took over responsibilities for for North Carolina. Those were the tragedies that we had. There's more to come with that, but I'll leave it there for the moment. During the year, we had a number of triumphs. One of them was that we hired a consultant to come in and help us develop a new strategic plan. The consultant really didn't develop the whole plan for us. He got us started on it, and over the spring of this last year, the plan was evolving and developing, and eventually it had 7 different elements in it. Included things like developing a new set of bylaws, memberships, and a variety of other activities. 3 of those, well, I'll go back a little bit. We assigned responsibilities to the various elements to people in our organization. Now, in North Carolina, as you may remember, North Carolina is very long and narrow, not very high up and down, but rather long, over 500 miles in length, only about 150 miles or so in width. And so we've divided the state into 3 different regions. And I will say that with the things that went on with our officers, I have to give the regions a lot of credit because they carried the ball for us in many, many ways. And we asked the regions to take on a responsibility for developing the 7 different elements of our strategic plan. And they worked very diligently on that. 3 of them have been completed thus far, 4 of them still are in work, but we expect those to be completed within the next year or so. And that will reform the state organization in our future, I'm quite sure. The summer was interrupted by our Republican legislature. They decided in their wisdom that after redistricting, the next thing they wanted to do was throw out the tax code and completely rewrite it. And of course, among other things, the goal was to develop a flat tax that would be simply a lower income tax and a lower sales tax, but they were cutting out all the exemptions they could get a hold of. And among the exemptions which they wanted to cancel were: 1, property taxes on all not-for-profit organizations. That included not just charitable organizations, but organizations like hospitals, like the North Carolina Continuing Care Residents Association, like CCRCs, like churches, you name it, all of them would have to pay property taxes. Second one had to do with sales taxes. North Carolina has a system for not-for-profits in which they pay sales taxes, but then they, twice a year, those organizations are allowed to submit a bill back to the state and get a return on the sales taxes they have paid. And most non-for-profit organizations will do that. They will keep track of what they pay in sales taxes, and they will send an invoice into the state twice a year to gain recovery of those taxes. The legislature wanted to take that away from all of the not-for-profits, same ones I mentioned before, all the charities, all hospitals, all the organizations like ours, all the churches. The third element of that was income taxes. And they wanted to slowly reduce the income taxes to get a flat tax level down around 4%. They haven't gotten there yet. They've reduced it from about 7% to about 5.5% next year. But within that, they were saying no more exemptions for medications, for hospital bills, for anything related. I think the only exemption that they are allowing from your federal return have to do with charities, charitable contributions. Well, we decided that that was not tenable for us and for our organizations. And so we set up a campaign, a write-in campaign of emails and letters to our legislature over the summer, and we continuously advertised, encouraged people to write in those letters and emails. We got cooperation from the leading age in North Carolina. They monitored the legislation for us, kept us advised of what new legislation was being proposed, and in case, I can tell you that in case of the property taxes, there was only one bill proposed and it didn't pass. In the case of the sales taxes, there were at least 6 bills and probably a lot more submitted. At the end, they were all combined into one bill, and that bill was heavily influenced by the letters and emails that we sent in. Our leading age representative, who has now become a good friend of North Carolina Continuing Care Residents Association, told us that he had been personally advised by the legislatures in Raleigh, North Carolina, that the letters and emails from seniors and CCRCs were the most effective influence on the results of their legislation. And as a result, essentially all the CCRCs, essentially all not-for-profit organizations that pay less than $4 million a year in sales taxes will be able to continue to have their sales taxes refunded. So that was a real triumph for us. And I want to tell you that the power of the people works in North Carolina. And I'm sure it can work in your state too, if you will let it. One last piece of tragedy. Towards the end of the year, just before I took over as president, Clint Willis came down with some serious problems with his legs and had to have 2 operations on his legs. During those operations, they determined that he had cancer in his kidneys and he had to have one of his kidneys removed. As a result, the transfer of responsibility was somewhat erratic for us this last year, but I think we've got it under control now, and we will be moving forward. I have one good word for Bob Nicholson. We have a new CCRC in North Carolina. Its name is Searstone. Excuse me. Searstone was started in February of this year. Thank you. Here. Searstone started in February this year. I got a call from a lady at Searstone just before I came up here. She wanted to join the North Carolina Continuing Care Residents Association. She'd heard about it, and I talked to her about joining, and I told her how to do it, and she's going to do it. I made her a new representative for her CCRC and the residents there on the spot over the telephone. And I also introduced her to NACCRA, and she told her where she could get some information about NACCRA. And so she promised to join NACCRA too. This is a brand new CCRC, just opened just 2.5 months ago, and we're already getting members. So I think we've got a good start. Thank you very much.